This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to Believe in People, a British podcast award-winning series about all things addiction, recovery and stigma. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today I'm with Ollie, who, losing his mother at the age of 8 and watching his father receive a 22-year prison sentence when he was just 15, reflects on how his parents' struggles with substance use shaped his own behaviour as he sought to numb his pain. Ollie particularly opens up about his heavy dependence on cannabis, recalling how he once saw himself as a weed connoisseur, exploring different strains and rationalising his constant use. In conversation, he recognises that cannabis had detrimental impact on his mental health, contributing to psychotic episodes and emotional isolation. Ollie discusses how smoking from morning to night, his life was consumed by addiction. And now, in recovery, he underscores how damaging cannabis can be, comparable to harder drugs despite a broader widespread social acceptance. Ollie, thank you so much for coming on the Believe in People podcast.
No worries.
I'm interested to talk to you because I hear you have an interesting story, so tell me a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the chair today.
Well, 25 years of pain, to be honest. Well, 24 years of pain from getting into recovery in October last year. Losing my mum at 8 years old to Dad getting 22 years in jail when I was 15. And spiralling out of control, you know. It's almost like that you follow in your parents' footsteps, don't you? You become, it's like I've picked up a saying over the time, it's like you're a product of your environment.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like for all these years, it's like if you become a footballer, or have you ever heard of Rory McIlroy? He trained, didn't he? His dad put a bet on him when he was a kid to be a professional golfer. He's going to win the Pro Champions. Well, if you put a bet on me when I was 8 months old, I was going to be a fucking addict. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, just based on the environment.
Yeah, based on everything.
That in itself, just to say, that is one of the heartbreaking things sometimes when you do see children or just in the street and the parents are shouting at them for something they've done, and it's like you know just by looking at them, like, that kid's not going to grow up to have a healthy mindset based on that small interaction that you sometimes see with people with their parents, and not necessarily to be judgmental, but you do see people and you think that kid ain't got a chance. And I imagine people may have looked at you in that same way.
Yeah, there were definitely parts of it where if I were to go back in time and look back on it, you know, people would look like, you know, this kid's going to have a difficult life. But I'm here today. I've not died. Yeah. I've made it through. You know, and for me, it's like you see most people in life, okay, and they've got this they've seen a little bit of dark and they've seen a little bit of light. I've seen like 90% dark and now I'm in 90% light. Do you know what I mean?
There's been a big switch around in like the
massive switch around. Time. Yeah, massive.
Tell me a little bit about your mum then. Do you know, obviously she passed away when you was 8 years old. Yeah. What was what was your relationship like with her up until that point?
So I never had a relationship as such with my mum. It was very basic. But so we'll go back to the start. I was obviously Step in the hospital in Manchester. I was born and about 6 months old I was taken off my mum. And my dad had a choice. It was either put me in care or take me on. And he took me on. And then throughout the years up until she passed, it was, you know, I'd go around to her house and she'd be drinking and she had a husband, and I've seen, you know, like her husband set her hair on fire. That was fucking horrible. You know, to see stuff like that as a young child is something that's pained me for years, you know. But she tried to be a good mum, you know. An addiction is a part of us. It's not us. Do you know what I mean? It's not who we truly are, because it's not who I truly am, you know. And, you know, my mum was plagued with addiction. She was an alcoholic. Growing up, you know, there were some good times with her. You know, it's not all bad. And, you know, like, I don't blame her for anything because I know what it's like to be an addict. However, you know, like growing up, like I say, there was good and there was bad, but I think, looking back on it, it's almost like she was never quite gonna get it, because there was so many interventions and stuff like that. And, I'd like to say I had a good relationship with her, but, I'd be talking shit.
Yeah.
I didn't have a good relationship with her. It's almost like I romanticize about, I had a good relationship with her, but I really
It's
didn't.
how you want to remember it more so than it actually was. Is that how you say,
Yeah, and that's what I learned throughout. I did a treatment period at the start of my recovery, 3 months of intense therapy, and that's what I learned. I like to romanticize about what it could have been with my mum, what it could have been with my dad. So, going back to the relationship, it was, seeing my mum every once a month, let's say. But in my head, if going through addiction, I like to say I see her all the time, but it was just a load of bollocks. I never saw her. And, that's what drugs and alcohol do to us, isn't it? It takes us.
I think it's interesting, though, when you talk about her and again, yes, you can say romanticising it, but you've been quite positive. What I'm seeing is that you're someone who's not carrying any real resentment towards your mum, which is, considering the circumstances, is quite a big thing, I think. Most people would maybe pin that on their parents and say it's because of her that I'm like this, it's because of him that I'm like this. And you don't seem to be doing that.
I think that's what recovery's given me, though, because if you'd have seen me 8 months ago, or prior to them 8 months, should we say, it was, my mum was an alcoholic, my dad was a fucking drug addict, and it would be blame, poor me, I play the victim, poor me, and it's not like that today. In addiction, we're poorly people. We're poorly people. The disease of addiction is a cunning. I like to call it a cunning, complicated cunt. That's what I like to call it.
Cunning, complicated cunt is wonderful. I actually really like that.
Yeah. That's what I like to call addiction. So it's taken both parents away from me, and it's almost like I was speaking to a taxi driver last night actually, and he started saying to me about how parents is being a parent and having parents is the most beautiful thing. And I said to him, I don't have that. And he was shocked. Do you know what I mean? And it made me realise, I was like, shit, like, yeah, there's something that I've not had in my life, which is painful. But like, I go back to the percentage of darkness and the percentage of light. I've come from that darkness into this light.
Made the change.
Yeah, massive change.
Going back to the point of you were a product of your own environment, I think it's interesting to looking at your mother, and you said so many interventions was used, but from what I'm hearing there, she was in an abusive relationship. She was, obviously having her addiction problems herself. Like, it's hard for people to make changes when that environment is still so negative. And I guess that's probably where she was, in that abusive relationship. And
I think many abusive relationships as well.
If that's just one memory you have, is her being set on fire, that's an awful. And for you as a child to witness that, that's the last thing I'd want, my daughter to ever witness is anything, traumatic like that, because that is it. And I suppose that brings us to the topic of trauma a little bit. Like, how much would you say personally that childhood trauma affected you growing up into those teenage years?
My whole life.
Yeah.
Without realising it, my whole life was centred around them traumas. And, I'd picked up behaviours from my mum, picked up behaviours from my dad, and constantly using drugs to mask the way I felt from what had happened to me. Them traumas, they either make you or break you, and fortunately, by the grace of God, it's made me, but them traumas were I was my trauma. Do you know what I mean? I literally was a living, walking fucking trauma. From seeing my mum have her hair set on fire, multiple, what would you call it? Altercations, stuff that kids shouldn't see, but I did. You know, and another example is like, you know, I was about a year before she passed. We was in the Romilly Arms in Marple, in Romilly, and she gave me my first pint.
And you'd been about 7 years
Seven,
old,
yeah, and she's given me the first try of a cigarette, and I remember going home as well. And she said, "All right, I'm going to go upstairs, and I'm not going to watch you smoke this cigarette." And I smoked a cigarette, you know. So that built me to who I was, who you know, who my traumas growing up. You know, like them traumas were a daily thing for me, subconsciously though, because consciously I'm using drugs to mask it. You know, so consciously I'm not actually thinking about these traumas. It's all in the subconscious. Do you know what I mean? And it's not like it's coming out and playing on me because I'm smoking weed, I'm using cocaine, I'm drinking alcohol to mask the way that, to stop that subconscious coming out and biting me. You know?
Yeah, just the thought of a parent, you know, giving the child substances and almost, I don't know, it's one of the things that's really hard to relate to. It's almost like, in a way, it's almost like, I want you to be messed up and fucked up the way I am.
Yeah.
That's almost how it sounds, you know, it's...
I accept her because that wasn't the real her. That was her addiction.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Credit to you to being able to split the two and actually apply logic to that situation. Because when you said that, I was like, how do you apply logic to that?
Yeah.
You've done it there.
Yeah.
You know?
It's difficult, you know, like growing up, I used that experience as sort of like a driving force for who I am. Do you know, this is me, who I'm meant to be. So, you know, like them times, like throughout my teen growing up and going back to the traumas again, you know, I used that as a driving force to be the way I was, you know, as an excuse, which isn't right.
No, it's not.
In many senses. But what I've got to remember is that the trauma is what makes you that way.
Yeah.
Product of my environment. You know, I was molded that way, and I have to change a lot. Even today, you know, I have to change. I have to constantly change and sort of like manipulate myself to not be that way anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not manipulate, but work really hard on my personality, my demeanour, my whole aura of who I am.
One of my favourite stories, and I've shared this before, but one of my favourite stories around relationships with our parents is it was a small comic book strip that I saw, and it's a homeless man and a millionaire both sat on a park bench, and they're given the question, "Why are you the way you are?" And their response is, "Because of my father." The homeless man was drinking on the park bench because his dad was an alcoholic and he's followed suit. The guy in the suit, the millionaire in this situation, had gone on to be successful because he became the opposite of his father. And I think that's an interesting thing on our relationships with parents. We either become very much like them or we become the complete opposite of them based on that relationship, whether it's positive or negative. We can go completely in either direction. How would you say that, I guess obviously there's the substance misuse, but going back to the question on traumas as well, how has your traumas affected your relationships with peers, with women, with, you know, other people? How has that affected your relationships now at 25 years old as an adult?
So, you know, growing up, seeing my dad behave in a particular way, I never wanted to be like my dad. The only aspects that I wanted to be of my dad were he was caring, loving, and he knew how to make money. And it wasn't necessarily making money selling drugs. He just knew how to make money through business and stuff like that. And I have that instilled in me. But, you know, like, I think it's a difficult one, innit, to sort of explain it to a T. But yeah, like I didn't want to be like my dad, but or my mum for that fact. But I think it was something that was out of my control. It's like you say, the millionaire and the homeless man, they didn't choose to be like that. I think it's more of the subconscious that it just naturally
their
happened.
Response to that situation.
Yeah, and everybody's different. Each person is different, and you know, for me, growing up through that, I always wanted to be like my dad. My dad was my hero. You know, my dad who is the one that provided food for me. You know, always put a roof over my house. Made sure that I wasn't in care from the age of 6 months old. You know, there's a lot of deciding factors to why I looked up to him. Do you see what I mean? And through that, I followed in his footsteps of his behaviours, of his attributes and his assets of character and his defects of character. I picked them all up. You know, I'm still my own man today. You know, I'm still my own person. However, you know, I've got a lot of my father in me. Less of my mum because, as I said, you know, I only saw my mum once in a blue moon.
The time you spent with her is much less than, especially in those, what we'd call those informative years of being a teenager.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. She was gone by then. So, I mean, it's like they say, your cognitive, you start being cognitive from 5 and you grow being cognitive. Is it conscious or cognitive? I'm not too sure, but it's one of them either way. And you start being, I think it's conscience. You start being conscious from 5 and then till 12, and that's when it all starts. And obviously I lost my mum in that period at 8 years old. And, you know, I didn't pick up as much as what the traits as she had, but I did pick up everything that my dad had.
Because going back to that, it is quite interesting when we look at our consciousness and when because I don't have memories from before the age of 4, 5. Do you know what I mean? I've got a couple little things I can vaguely remember. A birthday party, I remember cutting my head open, and based on where I lived, and that makes me realise actually I would have been about 4 or 5 at that time, but still. And I've had this conversation with my wife about my daughter when she said, "Oh, let's go to you know, shall we look at booking Disneyland this year?" I'm like, well, 1, no, because it's ridiculously expensive. But 2, I said she wouldn't remember it. Yeah. And one of the things that I've looked at, especially, you know, having the 2-year-old daughter, is they won't necessarily remember what happens, but they'll remember how things made them feel. And I guess, yes, you can say that you only really, you know, had that consciousness from 5, and if your mum passed away at, you know, 8, there's kind of 3 years there. But what you would have had was how you was made to feel between 0 and 5. If you felt safe, if you felt scared, all those things, yes, you don't necessarily remember the exact event, but there's signs there to prove that you would remember those emotions and those environments. And those, they do say 0 to 5 is such a pivotal an important stage in any human being's life, really. So it's interesting if you was in such a negative environment, how that could affect you even from, you know.
Well, it's funny. It's funny because actually, obviously the natural part of my brain has blocked so much stuff out between the majors right up until about got to be 10, 11. Because I was living in Manchester after my mum passed. We were still in and around Manchester area. My dad got into a bit of trouble and stuff like that. And we ended up fucking off down to Devon. So my dad took me to a new place, new school, new people, all that kind of stuff. But besides that, I don't really remember until I moved into the new life, the new area. And even still then, there's a lot that my brain... it's almost like how would you put it? It's like a natural occurrence. I don't know whether that's the right term.
I think in some way, I know we're using the word a lot, but the trauma response as well is sometimes there. In it, but it can block things out as well. Interestingly enough, which I mean, trauma again, a very complicated thing. Do you know
how powerful the brain is?
How powerful the brain can be to protect us in a way for us to forget things and so forth. Yeah, absolutely.
And it was quite difficult actually because right in my life story in treatment, it was really difficult because I just could not remember for the life of me the first 15 years of my life. Do you know, like up until meeting my girlfriend, my first love, it was like I don't really remember much, and I sat there for hours and hours on end, trying to figure it out. And even when I read it out, I said to the counsellor, I said, "That's not in order. That's not in order. It's all out of place."
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the way the man works.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated childhood, and it's interesting because normally when we speak to people with lived experience of substance misuse, they're often much older than you are. You're still very young, so those childhood traumas, we're talking of things that happened in the last 10 years, which isn't very long ago, really.
No.
Often when we have guests on, we're talking about things that happened 20, 30 years ago and how it still affected them as adults. So it's quite interesting to ask this question because of how young you are. But with the experience that you've had, what was your rock bottom moment when you realised that this addiction that you went on to have had really taken over your life?
So for me, it's quite difficult to draw from a rock bottom as such, because I never was truly in pain from using drugs. I was never truly like, oh my God, this is gonna kill me. This is the end of the world. Do you know what I mean? I'll be dead. I was never like that. But for me, so the first two, what I draw pain from to keep me clean today is the loss of both parents. One's, in jail and one passed away. So I draw pain from that. But, the end of my addiction and my using, I'd had about 30 grand and it was gone.
Where did that 30 grand come from? Was that like from drug dealing or was it inheritance?
No, inheritance.
Inheritance?
Yeah.
And was that inheritance from your mother? Or?
No, it was inheritance from my grandma.
Okay.
And it disappeared in the blink of an eye.
Jeez.
Disappeared, and it was a case of, let's put it between a 6 to maybe 8 month period. It was stagnant, to be fair, because obviously they adopted my mother, raised her. She was an alcoholic. She passed away. So they're very, very tetchy. Do you know what I mean? They're like, don't want to give him too much. Don't want him to go and blow it.
So you didn't get given the full 30 grand at once?
No, but I blew it.
Okay.
I blew it. And it was, it was like 6 here, 6 here. So it was big chunks enough. And, fair enough, it didn't all go on drugs, but let's say 60% of it did. So yeah, it all went on drugs.
Do you think that inheritance contributed to the escalation of the cocaine habit?
Yeah, because there was more partying, there was more of a, because for me on cocaine, it's like I can pull any woman, that's how I felt, or even on MDMA, I could pull any woman. Yeah. And, losing my mother, it's sort of like I fixated on women to be my saviour, to rescue me from life as such, from my traumas. So yeah, there was a big use of cocaine because, I started picking up, buying ounces and ounces of it, selling it, and then not making a lot of money and thinking, where the fuck's this gone, So it's almost like, yeah, it massively impacted my use of cocaine, but I think, the main one for me was cannabis.
Yeah.
And
so I was just going to ask, obviously, because if we look at this in almost like a timeline,
yeah,
at 7 years old, you're introduced to alcohol and cigarettes.
Yeah.
What was the next substance in that order? Was it cannabis or cocaine?
It was cannabis, yeah.
How old was you when you first had cannabis then?
Oh, so when I moved to, was it in Manchester? I think it was in Devon, to be honest with you. So I moved to Devon round 10 years old. That was like the end of year 5, start of year 6. And then it was like, so it was around 11, 12 years old in year 7. I don't actually remember my first experience on it. I know it was good.
Yeah. Well, it must
I'll be honest with you.
To carry on. You must have got something out of it.
Yeah, I know it was good, because all of our first experiences on drugs are probably, most people would say they're good. I know it was good, but
it has to be in a way. Otherwise, you just
wouldn't go back, would you?
So
Yeah.
Have it once and then go, not having that again.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
if you're there to form a habit of something,
yeah,
you have to have enjoyed it the first time.
yeah. I know. To be fair, though, I had an experience. Obviously, I had the experience with alcohol with my mum when I was 7, and then I remember going to a wedding, and I was stealing all the alcohol from her because everyone was wasted. All my family were wasted, and I was wasted. And I must have been. Don't quote me on the age because I'm not too sure, but I know if you judge it in my head, it was before we moved to Devon at 10 years old, so it must be between the ages of 8.
I like how you've got everything timeline based on where you lived. Like, this must happen then because I was in this place.
Yeah. And when my mum passed, so it was in between 8 and 9, and I remember getting absolutely wankered. And there's a funny.
How did people, just before you share the story, how did people not look at a child at that age pissed out the face at a wedding and not think, okay, there's a problem here?
Yeah, I mean, look, aside from the black sheep of the family, which is my mum, my dad, and my cousin and myself, obviously I wasn't known to be the black sheep at that time, but aside from them, I have a really good family. I've got a really, workers' family, work really hard, and I think it was more like, oh God, how has Ollie got pissed?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was more like, oh, Ollie's wankered. What the fuck's happened? So I don't necessarily think it was more of what's the issue? It was
it was more they've just seen that you've managed to, on this one, see it as a one-off. On this one occasion, he's managed to grab a vodka and coke off the counter, and here it is.
And it wasn't just me. There was a few of us, the younger lot. Yeah. We were all stealing beers and getting wankered. Yeah. And we were running round in where was it? It was it doesn't matter. It was in Marple somewhere. And we were all running round in the marquee at a wedding, absolutely wankered in.
I've just had a flashback actually there because I remember I must have been around 10, 11 myself. A tiny, I've never seen them since, a crate of stubby Stella Artois glasses, really tiny bottles it was. And me and my mates got pissed on them, and we saw them at a party, and we was about 11, 12, so in a way I can relate. Yeah,
I mean, it was a little bit before that, but, it wasn't a bad time. Yeah. No one was mad. I wasn't, can't remember, to be fair. I was going to say I wasn't hungover the next day, but I thought I'd be lies, I don't remember.
Ollie, can you describe a day of, in the peak of your cocaine and cannabis use and the extent of your dependency?
Cannabis use, yeah, because cocaine use was more of a, I'd like to say a weekend thing, but it wasn't. It was 3-day benders and stuff like that. But let's go to the cannabis use. I think I peaked for about 5 years, I'll be honest with you. And it was more of a case of selling it, chasing my ass to get more because I'd smoked all the profit, smoked into other people's money as well. And if anyone's listening that I owe money to, I'm fucking sorry. But yeah, so it was wake up in the morning, have a spliff rolled from the night before, smoke it. And that was just consistent. It was almost like chain smoking cigarettes. I just could not put it down for the life of me. And, I tricked myself into I was a connoisseur of cannabis. Connoisseur, I was a weed connoisseur. Yeah. That's what I generally thought. And it was morning to night, from when I opened my eyes to when I went to sleep. And if I didn't have it, I was fretting. I'd fret. What am I going to do? Can't cope, blah, blah, blah. Really difficult looking back on it. And to be fair with you, I've not even really delved into it like this. This is the first time I'm sort of realising how bad it was right in this moment, I love to get all different strains and all that kind of stuff, and I really love to delve in all the different strains, and I guess that was just a part of my addiction, convincing myself that I'm a fucking weed connoisseur, when really I'm just masking the way that I felt, It was difficult at times because, it caused me to have like psychotic episodes, people calling the ambulance for me. And that wasn't just the weed, that was the alcohol with it, because alcohol made me a different person. And then going into the cocaine, I'd always be the last one standing, or if I was with another addict, we'd be the last one standing, and, it's sometimes I'd go on for 2 or 3 days.
Just not knowing when the party's supposed to end. No. It's just when everyone else is done, you continue in that behaviour.
Don't get me wrong, there were times where I was like, enough's enough. But it doesn't deviate from the fact that I was still an addict, and there were still times when I was, the last one standing, the one who always wanted more. But, in relation to cocaine and weed, it was like, I always wanted more weed. I always wanted more of that, more this, different flavours, different strains, and really like feeding into this, like, this whole, like, how can I put it? This whole hype of...
It is glamorized, isn't it?
Yeah.
As well? And I've got friends who smoke cannabis, but are almost in some way fanatical about cannabis.
I was fanatical.
So what you're saying, I can relate to. We went to Vegas a few years ago, and there was a dispensary there, and you went in, and it was like a supermarket. There was guys there, and he said, obviously, my friend, who big cannabis smoker, goes in and says, so what sort of feeling are you looking for? He said, you benefit from using this strain, or if you wanted to feel this, you do. And it was like a candy shop. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And going back to what you're saying then about, you mentioned then you was a different person of alcohol. I used to smoke cannabis recreationally when I was about 18, 19. Never addicted to it. I could have it once and then not have it again for months and have it again, be absolutely fine. But like when we would smoke it, we'd just sit around my mate's flat, really chill, have a pizza. When I'd have alcohol, we could be getting into scraps around town and things like that. And sometimes that almost violent side of you, it'd be possible that could come out. So with that in mind, I think cannabis sometimes gets this reputation of being not necessarily
a good drug.
A good drug. And it's hard to argue when you look at let's have a look at the amount of cannabis-related deaths in the last year. Zero. How many, alcohol-related deaths in the past year? Thousands.
Can I just say something, though?
Go for it.
Cannabis-related deaths, you said 0.
Yeah.
How many men and women have committed suicide? If they weren't smoking cannabis, my mental health has improved so much from stopping smoking cannabis. So, realistically, are the facts true?
Yeah.
Well,
this is the interesting thing, and I always say this whenever I do training on drug and alcohol awareness. I always say the figures are skewed, because let's have a look at people who have died of cancer in the last year and how alcohol can be related to certain cancers. So the figures for stuff like this are always skewed. I think that's a really good point you've just made there about how it can contribute to low mental health and suicide rates, because that is never taken into consideration.
Never.
But when you try to have these arguments with friends who are, fanatical about cancer, fanatical about cannabis, 420, all that sort of stuff, legalise and stuff like that. It's quite a hard argument to have. When I know from being, from someone who's used the substance myself, I think, actually, I was probably a nicer person to be around when I'd smoked cannabis as a teenager than I was when I was a young drunk.
Agreed.
So I get the arguments, and sometimes they're quite hard to argue, especially when you look at the way cannabis is used and for its medicinal properties and things like that. With that in mind, how did those conflicting messages affect you when you was looking to gain recovery? And was that in your mind as a reason to keep using? Was it like, yeah, but look at the medicinal properties and look at the facts of this and this and this? Because right now you've just argued, and it was a really good point about the suicidal rates and low mental health related to cannabis use. Really good point. How was that for you when you was on the opposite, when people was maybe telling you these things? And did you argue with the medicinal properties and all this stuff? Was you ever, as you said then, you was fanatical about it yourself?
Yeah.
What was it like to come to that realisation and see this substance in a more negative?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, it's like, I don't think, other than my nana, I've never come across an argument as such where someone's on the other side in recovery explaining what it can do to me. Not from what my memory tells me anyway. But what I can say is being on this side of it in recovery is seeing other people, I was literally not having an argument, but having a, trying to help somebody. They asked me, they said, I want to get sober. And then they started saying like, well, it helps me ADHD, it helps this, that and the other.
Helps my anxiety.
It helps my anxiety.
I'm not anxious when I'm smoking cannabis.
Yeah, and, all I can say to that is that, it actually made me worse without me realising, and I was a fanatic in the sense of like, it helps me, helps me sleep. I can't sleep without it, helps my ADHD, helps me with like, multiple things that I could come up with. A load of bollocks, to be quite honest with you. Because when you get onto the other side into recovery, you will see a massive difference without it. And I am a massive advocate for recovery because I have seen the difference in myself. Going back to the treatment process that I did, I come across that I was, we discovered that I was using cannabis to shut down so I could sleep more. Because I didn't want to feel the way I wanted to feel. I wanted to be asleep all the time. Do you know what I mean? Spend all my days sleeping. And I think, like, I can't really say too much from my perspective of what it was like to say that, sort of be that kind of person that was like, oh, it helps me, because I don't really, I can't say that because I don't really remember having them arguments. All I can say is on the other side of it, in being in recovery, is that I've spoke to so many people and they all give the same thing. It helps with my mental health. It helps with certain aspects of their life. It helps. I can't sleep without it, blah, 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 blah. And it's got to the point with me that, they'll be ready when they're ready.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, and that's it with any addiction, really. And it's one thing that I say I manage a volunteer team here and a peer mentor team, people with experience. And I always say, you can only help the people who want to be helped.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to accept that there's nothing we can do for this person. And it's not that there's nothing we can do for them. It's nothing we can do because they don't want anything that we can do. That's the other side of it.
And they can have a desire to change. Yeah. So they can have a desire, but they need a sincere commitment. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? A desire
and a commitment. I really like that, actually. A desire to change and a commitment to change are two very
vastly different things. Yeah. Vastly different, because I always, I actually went to my first NA meeting when I was 18. And I had a desire to change. I didn't want to be like that anymore, but I did not have the sincere commitment. And, I only had the sincere commitment when I was like, whoa, enough's enough of this. I need to, nip this in the bud because this is getting well out of control. I could have put a fucking deposit on a house. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I could have done all sorts of stuff and I just didn't do it. And yeah, it's like, it's a really difficult one because people are only going to be ready when they're ready. And I've found that, in my time, it's only a short time, but in my short time in recovery, I've noticed that I can't save people. Yeah. I can't rescue them, because if I try and rescue them, how much is that going to start affecting me? And, I've got one particular friend where it has affected me. It has taken a toll on me. But I've had to grow and learn from that people are ready when they're ready. They're only ready to change their behaviours and change their outlook when they're ready. I can only give them so much, because otherwise I become a rescuer, you know, and I don't want to be a rescuer. I want to be able to give people advice and help them accordingly when, you know, they're ready.
Advice is one of them things as well. There's nothing worse than being on the receiving end of advice when you don't want it. Do you know, I think it's you have to want that advice for it to be helpful, don't you? Otherwise, when people just start giving you advice and you don't want it, it's like, fuck off, I'm not interested.
yeah, literally.
So a couple of things there really is, I guess, in what way did using those substances help you with that emotional pain from the past? You talked about how cannabis helped with, you know, ADHD and anxiety, but how did that mask those issues, that childhood trauma that you'd experienced?
Well, you know, let's put it like this, right? So my mum passed away when I was 8. My dad went to jail when I was 15, 16, something like that. And I never remembered my dad's birthday, my mum's death date, my mum's birthday, all of them things, you know, that relate to my mum and dad. And only since being in recovery have I been able to, and I'm still not good at with my dad now. I'm still not good at remembering to get my dad Father's Day card, birthday card, and but I am quite good at, you know, going to my mum's grave on, like, I went for the first time in a long time on her death date, and I went to Mother's Day to her grave, and, you know, like, throughout the years, it's not just the drugs that blocked it out, the traumas. It was the mental block from what we were talking about before, how powerful the brain is to mentally block that stuff out.
Just trying to, again, I guess in some ways, we said it's trying to protect you, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess how that can help. Like I'm not someone who ever really gets caught up on dates and things like that. Or, and when I say caught up, that sounds quite negative, but on the anniversary of a death date. So far in my life, I haven't experienced a family-related death where each year that day comes around and I'm filled with joy. But my mum, for instance, on the day that her mum died, bear in mind her mum died when she was 19. My mum's in her late 50s now. She still gets really sad on that day. And the day of when my granddad passed away, the day of her dad, she still gets really sad on that day. So then they can really affect you, can't they? And I guess what you're saying there is, by being on the substances, that kind of blocks the pain of bringing those things up and thinking about those people and doing things like that.
Yeah, I always felt guilty for it as well.
Yeah.
I always felt guilty for not remembering, like, I still feel guilty now for, like, recently Dad's Father's Day, like, my dad's asking me where, you know, have you sent the card? And I'll be real with you, I'll be like, yeah, I've got the card, what's your prison number, blah, 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 and I've still not got it. And it's almost like that guilt and that shame around not being able to give my dad just what he wants, but also, like, what he doesn't remember is I'm still coming round from all them traumas, you know, and I'm not using drugs anymore to mask the way that I should feel, you know, and now I should feel the way that I feel. It's still difficult, you know.
Tell me a little bit about that now, because I worked with a lad before, and he said, funny enough, it was the irony in this is when he was in addiction, he said he could be having a right fool in the street, and he didn't think anything about the way people look at him. He said when he got recovery, he said, I felt like I was walking on the street naked. He said, I felt like everyone was looking at me. I said, I felt like my emotions was bare and everyone knew exactly what I was thinking and feeling at all times. Like, what was that like for you when you get into sobriety then? Did you suddenly feel like really vulnerable, to really aware of everything around you, or what was it like?
Not really. I mean, like, for me, an active addiction, I was always the class clown, the you know, center of attention, and I still have that today. I still walk down the street and I'll scream and shout and be the fool. And it's not much has changed for me in that sense, you know, like, because I think without the drugs, I'm still the same person as I was. You know, and if anything, it emphasizes who I am even more now I'm off the drugs. Yeah. Do you know? So when I was stoned all the time, I wouldn't be as vibrant and as as talkative, and we would not have had this conversation.
Yeah.
We would not have had an in-depth conversation like this. And, I think it's actually amplified for me who I am. I don't feel naked in the street. If anything, I felt more naked prior in active addiction than I do now in recovery. Do you see what I'm And don't get me wrong, there's times where I'm like, do feel naked, where I feel like everyone's judging me and everyone can see what I'm feeling, thinking, blah, blah, blah. But, I think I've grown as a person. And I think that person always wanted to be coming out in active addiction. And to be fair, it did when I was on coke.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? When I was on coke, when I was on drink, I was the life of the party, funny as fuck, and a good time. And now without the coke and without the drink, I'm just that person naturally,
Yeah.
And I don't have weed to mask my personality anymore.
Yeah.
And my personality is a loving, caring, funny, dickhead.
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, and that's how I've grown into being recovery. And
Nice.
I don't want to be anything else. I enjoy who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. And it's like I had to get into recovery to find out who I was, because otherwise I would still be using, still not having a clue who Ollie was. Being this vibrant person on cocaine and alcohol, this loving person on MDMA, and this anxietied up, quiet, sleeping guy on weed. It's like, these drugs gave me, it's like powers, like Mortal Kombat. If there was like a cocaine button, an alcohol button, a weed button, it'd give you all different abilities.
It makes you feel differently, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And the environment's a big part about that as well. Like, as I was saying, like I personally wouldn't have gone on a night out and smoked cannabis before I went on a night out, because that would put me in a completely different mood. I wouldn't be in the right place for a night out. But if I was chilling at home with friends, cannabis seemed like a great idea. If you can go on a night out, that's when you're looking at cocaine, you're thinking about alcohol. Do you know? That's because it suits those environments. And as you said, each one of them give you those different powers, but those powers are relevant to the environment that you're around in as well.
Yeah, I mean, but for me, I'd smoke a spliff before I went out clubbing.
Well, that's because you had a cannabis addiction.
That's
the difference between recreational and dependency, isn't it? Sort of thing. It's just the way it was. But tell me about, I guess in terms of the real turning point for you then, was there a specific incident or realisation that made you decide that you need to, seek help and start this recovery journey that you're on now? Yeah,
I mean, when I was 18, obviously I mentioned that I went to my first NA meeting, just wasn't ready. But what that gave me was it planted a seed. Do you know what I mean? So I have said before, it ruined my using for the next, from 18 to 24, what's that, 6 years. But it didn't quite ruin my using, because I was still young, having fun. There were still fun times, don't get me wrong. But the turning point for me was, I was in a relationship with a girl. She had a lot of the same problems with me as me. She had lost her dad and stuff like that. And, like, I'd come out of that relationship and I was trying to change, and I was doing stints of, I like to call it being a dry drunk. So it's like no recovery, but clean with all the behaviours. So I always kept picking back up and using. So the turning point for me was a period of time. There was I'd like to say there was a year of wanting to change, but not knowing how. And then I got the money. I was up and down from Devon, partying, going to festivals. I tried to set up a business with a good friend of mine. Shout out Wolf Marketing, Wolf Distribution. I tried to set up a business with him. His business is still going successfully, but I wasn't able to be a part of that. Because I was a dry drunk. I was trying to get stints of clean time. So there was a period of a turning point for me. It wasn't just one day I went, oh yeah, I'm going to change. It was like, there was a long there was a lot of things that happened where it made me go, oh shit, I need to go to rehab. And it wasn't even that, to be fair with it wasn't even that I wanted to go to rehab. I was sofa surfing, and I needed somewhere to live. And then an outside sort of a group. It was a guy from he has like because I'm a musician myself. He's set up like a sober rave group. Okay. I was working with him, and he helped me a lot. And he got clean with the house manager of Acorn where I live now. And he rung the house manager one day because for a couple of weeks I'd been on to him, I need to get somewhere to live. I need to move out, and I don't want to be sofa surfing anymore. And he got me an assessment at Surtec House in Stockport. He got me, and then from there it was about a couple of weeks, and I moved into the house, and there was a long period of a turning point for me because I stopped selling the drugs, I was trying to get clean, like I say, but being a dry drunk. I was trying to be a different person, but still struggling with my trauma. And, getting into Acorn at first was like, great, I've got somewhere to live. And then all of a sudden I was like, I am an addict. Like, I knew I was an addict anyway, but, there's a lot of work to do now. It's not just a bed. Yeah. It's not just somewhere to live. There's a lot of work to do. And, that was the start of my journey, 12th of October, 2023. That was the start of my journey, but there was a whole year prior to that where I'd stopped doing the selling of the drugs. I tried to stop partying as much, tried to go without weed for periods of time, but I really struggled with it. And then obviously I had to get into recovery to change, but I didn't realise I was getting into recovery because I just thought I was getting a bed. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It was just abstinent house where you get a bit of help. Do you know what I mean?
What was you mentioned there about selling drugs?
Yeah.
What were some of the severe consequences that you faced as a result of that addiction? Have you ever been caught selling drugs?
Yeah, once. But I was quite fortunate with that. Because what happened was, so my dad murdered someone down in Devon, in Kingsbridge, and basically the police officers, where I got caught in Devon, the police officers knew who I was, and it's almost like they felt sorry for me. I was very fortunate to get away with it. I had, to be honest with you, I had a lot of drugs hidden on like a flat roof. If they'd have found all them, I would have been fucked. Do you know what I mean? But they didn't. They only found a small amount. Don't quote me on it. It was like 5 to 9 grams of cocaine and stuff like that. And I actually started like getting help from the food bank down in Devon. Turning up. And I think that because the food bank was involved with the police, they coordinated and they work very closely because they've got to, because the food bank see a lot of community stuff that the police don't see, and they've got to report it anyway. Blah blah blah. Like, I was quite fortunate because I started going to the food bank. They saw me turning up, not selling drugs anymore. I was just, they saw me trying to make a change, and I was just very fortunate, to be honest with you. I like to say it's God that helped me, because not that I'm not built for a prison, but I wasn't meant to go to jail. I was meant to shine the light out here and help people. I've got a slogan that say I'll die happy if I can help 100 people. So, I feel I've got a calling in life, and that wasn't my calling to go there. If it was my calling to go there, I would have gone. I feel like if that was a part of my journey, I would have been there, but it wasn't. And another consequences of selling drugs, I still think about this girl to this day, a lot when I'm lonely as well. I fucked a massive relationship up because of me selling drugs. and me being a liar, me being a cheater, me being a manipulative guy, you know, all them things, them addictive behaviours that we get from being in addiction. So I ruined a relationship, and I had, you know, that's another consequence. I lost people from selling drugs. I had to move down south because I was selling drugs and I owed people money. You know, and down south, I didn't have to move out the area. I kind of chose to move out the area because that guy wasn't as prolific as such as chasing me. But, you know, like, the consequences were that I was constantly running from, you know, selling the drugs because I wasn't good at selling drugs. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't good at it because I fucking smoked all the profit.
Yeah.
You know, smoked all the weed, spent all the cocaine money on shit, like clothes and all that stuff. And yeah, it was like, you know, like, I had a lot of consequences from it, which were difficult for me sometimes because I just wanted to fight. I wanted to fight the world. You know, like, why are you chasing me for money? Like, I felt like you should know my story. Yeah. That's what I felt like. Yeah. You know, but it's not like that today. You know, I pray for them people. Hopefully they can get out of selling drugs and stuff like that because it's a nasty world. But a lot of consequences, man. A lot of consequences. And
I think it's one of the things, it's interesting to have this conversation with someone without it sounding patronising, with how young you are, to have that understanding of I guess consequences and the way things could go, because you know it could quite easily have got, in a way, much worse. It might not feel like it, but your life could have, you know, at 25, your life could have got much worse if you'd continued down that path. So to get a grip on it at this age, I think is incredible, really.
I think I've always been hyper aware though. I think I've always had like a hypersensitivity and being hyper aware. That's probably what's kept me alive through active addiction as well. Coming into recovery, I've got this hyper awareness. You know, like, no one's perfect, but I can see when I say that, because I've had a few times where I've been in a relapse process and I've had to pull myself out of it. Recently, you know, old behaviours cropping up, being irritable and discontent, and that coming into it, you know, I've been in a relapse process a couple of times now, but because I feel that I'm hyper aware and hypersensitive to change, I feel like that's saved my arse so many times.
And the relapse can, I often say this, but the relapse can happen before the relapse.
Yeah, there's a relapse process. Yeah,
people that sometimes don't understand that. As like, the relapse isn't necessarily the point where you pick up a substance again. You can plan a relapse almost. You can start to explode and, you know, be in this position where you're doing X, Y, and Z, and then you pick up the substances. But the relapse has already happened, like you said, and even that is quite impressive, to have that knowledge of those behaviours and understand that the relapse is a process. And then I just want to go back to, you said one of your sayings is, you know, about helping 100 people. What would you say to someone who is in the depths of addiction and feels like there's no way out?
There's a lot more help out there than we realise. It's just about digging a bit deeper and finding it. You know, I always thought the system was shit. And there's still part of the system that is shit. But actually there's a lot of charities out there that are away from the system. So that's someone that's out there struggling. There's help on your doorstep. You just don't realise it. You know, to that person that is, you know, still using drugs or drinking alcohol or whatever it may be, there's a service in your town somewhere. There's, you know, CGL's one of them. Yeah. You know, Acorn, where I am, is one of them. You know, there's a lot of services that ain't in front of you like that. Yeah. You've got to dig for it. You've got to dig for it, and that's where their journey can start. You know, their journey can start by asking for help. You know, you know, and around men, you know, there's no stigma. There shouldn't be a stigma around asking for help. You know, it's okay to not be okay. You know, and asking for help is actually a big, big thing. You know, so to whatever person's listening, you know, type in, ring up Samaritans, maybe, you know, even if you're not suicidal or anything, ring up Samaritans and they'll probably send you to the right places. Ring up, type in on the internet, drug services, they'll help you if you want to be helped. You know, there's so many things, and my suggestion is type in NA, CA, AA fellowships, turn up to a meeting.
Peer support.
Yeah, peer support, yeah. And there's so much love that you'll be shown. Like, you know, I know someone at the moment she's been quite nervous about getting into recovery, and I couldn't quite make it to some meetings with her, and she's done it. She's gone to a meeting and, you know, she's changed not her whole life yet, but
it's a process, isn't it?
Yeah, she started to do it, but just because, you know, she conquered that fear. It's a fear, I believe it's a fear-based illness. We're feared up on a lot of things, you know. The disease of addiction is a fear-based illness, and I believe that if you can just crack that fear and just conjure up some courage from somewhere deep within, make that first step, and even if they don't go back to it, the seed's been planted. They've got this thing in the head where they know where the help is. You know, there's rehabs all over the country that will take you in for free. Do you know what I mean? I know that for a fact because I've seen multiple people get funding and go into rehab. You know, it's just about your area and having the correct people around you and digging for that support. Like I said, you've got to ask for help. So anyone listening, anyone that's deep in active addiction, I just hope they can Google it and find a way out, because it's a beautiful life on the other side, I'll tell you that.
Oh, thank you. So at the end of the day, you're a young lad, 25. I think when, again, addiction and recovery, it's often language that's used by people who are a little bit older, who have a little bit more experience of substance misuse, that have faced, you know, their own rock bottoms and their life has fallen apart anyway. For a young person, what was you said you went to your first, you know, meeting when you was 18, and even now at 25, what is the general response to being so young and going into these fellowship environments?
Welcoming.
Yeah.
Because the older generation who have maybe got years of clean time, maybe don't, they don't want all them years of pain that they experienced. They want to see young people in the meeting. It's hugs, tea, biscuits, and, you know, welcoming. And it's really simple to get into these meetings. There's no cost. There's no calling up appointments. All you do is go online. For me personally, my fellowship is Narcotics Anonymous. So type in NA Meetings UK. It's very simple. You have like, put your postcode in, a 10-mile area, or however far you want to travel out of the area. Put the day of what day it is when you want to go to the meeting. Put what time, and a whole meeting list will come up. And you simply
there's that many, isn't there? That it can filter down to day, time, and all. And obviously area. That's incredible.
Yeah, and you can travel all over the world with the fellowship. You know, my sponsor, he goes to where's he? All over the world. I can't put it. He's been in Turkey in fellowship. You know, he's been in Spain in the NA fellowship, not understanding what they're saying. Yeah. But you know, some
being in the environment.
But some places in Spain they will even start speaking English because there's an English person in there. Do you know what I mean?
To make it welcoming for
the
person.
Like it's very, very simple to go to your first meeting, actually. Although it's daunting, although there is a fear barrier there, it's such a beautiful experience.
Did you face any, to be fair, you probably didn't with the way you've described it as being very welcoming, but I would have thought that going in there with a cannabis problem, that there may be almost some stigma in the sense of, oh, you're here because you've only had a cannabis problem. Do you know, we've all had heroin problems. You know, substances that you could argue have, do you know, I guess, I'm going to say worse. Substances that people could argue as worse than cannabis. And you didn't face any of that then?
Opposite,
yeah.
I was the one with the stigma that the cannabis is just, it's only a light drug. But, you know, now from spending my time in recovery that I compare cannabis to heroin without the physical addiction.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I really do. And it's not the drug. It's the taking of it, the taking of any mind-altering substance that causes consequences on your life. Do you see what I mean?
I was going to say, it's what that substance takes away from your life, regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
If it stops you from having healthy relationships
Yeah.
and a healthy life, it doesn't matter what the substance is, surely. It just matters how that has impacted you as an individual. And like you said, that can transcend to anything, really, can't it?
And I'm quite passionate on like how bad weed is as well. Weed is, like we talked about the suicides that's not on the statistics, weed ruins your life. And when you come off it, you'll be well, when I can only speak for myself. When I come off it, I was gobsmacked. It takes a few weeks. It takes 4 weeks, you know, to settle down and get you sleeping back into pattern and all that. But I've been alive for 25 years and 4 weeks is a very short period of time. Although 4 weeks sounds like a long period to settle down off a drug and become back to your almost normal self. 4 weeks is absolutely fuck all. You know, to be a normal human being again.
Yeah.
And be a valued member of society, not someone that's sat in the house being a dosser, smoking weed. You know, that was me. I was a dosser. I was boring when I smoked weed. I just didn't do anything. My appetite actually went, although it was meant to get the munchies, well, that disappeared, and I started stopping it. I couldn't eat when smoking weed, you know? So, yeah, I think it's more like weed's destroying more people than they realise. Because it's so socially accepted.
So since coming off cannabis, how are you channeling yourself into creative things? I understand you're interested in music. How does that look now for you?
Well, I've always been interested in music. I've always been a creator. I've always been a giving person. You know, so let's just compare it a little bit. In active addiction, smoking cannabis and using drugs, I wasn't committed to doing the things that I liked. I wasn't committed to music. I wasn't committed to helping people. But for me today, you know, like going on to the music, I love music. Being in a studio with a microphone, sort of like that, is my safe space, you know. All right, sometimes I don't always speak about this life that I live of recovery. Sometimes I speak about the old life. Do you know what I mean? But that's more like trying to hit the market because, you know, I'm not in music for money. And this is going to sound controversial, but bear with me. I'm in the music for the fame. And the fame is what's going to give me the influence, and with the influence I can change people's lives. Yeah, you know.
I get it.
And so, you know, I don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight, but what the spotlight will give me is influence, and in turn of the influence, people listen to you. Yeah. It's like, look how Googled Andrew Tate was, for example, and how much influence he had. If I could even have 10% of that influence, it would follow suit of my story. So, you know, the things that I do in recovery now is I do 4 or 5 meetings a week. Yeah. I write lyrics all the time because that helps me convey how I'm feeling at the time, whether that be from the past life, whether that be about women, whether that be about, you know, turning people away from drugs and stuff like that. And yeah, like, I have a really good life today.
Good.
I have a really good life. I'm blessed. You know, I wake up every morning. As long as I do the same as what I did yesterday, today, I'll stay clean today.
Ollie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've just got a few questions I'd like to ask you, and we end all our podcast with these. And my first one is, what is your favourite word?
My favourite word?
Quick fire answers. Boom.
Oh, I can't do a quick fire. I've got to think.
Go on.
I'm cognitive.
Nothing wrong with that.
Cognitive.
Cognitive. There we are. Least favourite word?
Least favourite word? Ooh. Loneliness.
Tell me something that excites you.
Experiences.
Tell me something that doesn't excite you.
Drugs.
What sound or noise do you love?
Snare.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Babies fucking screaming on the fucking tram.
What's your favourite swear word?
I don't know, actually. That's a good one.
I like how that's the one that stumped you.
Yeah. Favourite swear word is cunt.
Nice. What profession would you like to attempt?
To be honest with you, I've got my eyes set on a few, but if I was going mad and being wild, it'd be being a fucking astronaut in space.
Nice. Do you know what? No one ever said that'd be my answer.
Yeah.
Just an astronaut. I'd love to give it a go.
Yeah.
It'd be terrible.
But if we actually bring it back
down to it, I'd be like, actually no, because of this reason, I'd be off.
Yeah, but if we bring it back and I say one, it'd be like, like a support worker or actually a charity owner.
Yeah.
Someone that owns a charity, and that is my goal. That's
nice.
my end goal.
What profession would you not like to do?
Like a surgeon or something.
And lastly, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You did well, son.
There we go. Ollie, thank you so much for coming on the Believe in People
Thank you.
podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, please check out the other episodes and hit that subscribe button. We're on Apple Music and Spotify, so please like and subscribe to be notified about our new episodes. You can also search for the Believe in People podcast on your favourite listening device, and if you can leave us a review, that will really help us in getting our message out there and rising up the daily podcast charts.